Silence often hides the most important truth about disrespect. Many people believe toxic behavior appears randomly, as if certain individuals are simply rude or naturally unpleasant, but reality works very differently. Disrespect is rarely accidental. It follows a pattern. It grows step by step, slowly, almost quietly, until one day it becomes a normal part of the relationship. A sarcastic comment here, a dismissive reaction there, a moment when someone interrupts you and acts as if your words carry no value. At first, these actions seem small, easy to ignore, easy to forgive, but small moments create powerful signals. Every reaction you show teaches other people how far they are allowed to go. This is the hidden rule that shapes every interaction in life, whether people realize it or not. Toxic individuals study reactions carefully, not in an obvious way, but through subtle observation. They notice hesitation, they notice silence, they notice when someone stays polite even after being treated poorly. And once they recognize that a person will tolerate disrespect without pushing back, the behavior begins to expand. What starts as a small comment slowly becomes open dismissal. What once felt like a harmless joke eventually turns into repeated humiliation. The truth that most people never learn is that toxic behavior grows only when it finds permission to grow. Many psychologists explain that toxic personalities often operate through a simple system of testing limits. They push boundaries a little at a time to see where resistance appears. If resistance never comes, the boundary disappears completely. In that moment, the balance of respect changes. The person who stays silent unintentionally teaches others that their feelings, time, and dignity are negotiable. This is why kind and patient individuals sometimes experience the most disrespect. Not because kindness is wrong, but because kindness without boundaries can be misunderstood as weakness. The modern world often celebrates being agreeable, calm, and understanding. Those qualities are valuable, but toxic personalities interpret them in a completely different way. Instead of appreciating patience, they see an opportunity. Instead of respecting politeness, they see an opening to dominate conversations, manipulate situations, or slowly take control of the dynamic. Over time, this creates a painful cycle where one person keeps trying to stay peaceful while the other continues pushing further. Yet a powerful shift can break this entire pattern in a single moment. The change does not require shouting, arguing, or dramatic confrontation. In fact, the most effective response is often quiet, controlled, and surprisingly simple. One specific behavior can transform the way toxic people treat you almost instantly. When used correctly, it sends a signal stronger than anger and clearer than long explanations. It changes the power dynamic that toxic individuals rely on. Once that signal appears, many toxic people react in a predictable way. Some adjust their behavior immediately because they realize the limits are real. Others slowly fade away because they understand the old tactics no longer work. Both outcomes lead to the same result. The disrespect stops growing. This video will uncover that powerful behavior and explain why it works so effectively from a psychological perspective. The discussion will explore the hidden mechanisms behind disrespect, the quiet mistakes that allow toxic people to gain influence, and the simple shift that forces them to rethink how they interact with you. Along the way, several surprising truths will appear. Many people believe respect is earned through constant kindness, endless patience, or the effort to keep everyone happy. But research on human behavior suggests a very different reality. Respect is often built through clear signals about personal limits. When those limits remain invisible, toxic individuals step closer and closer until they dominate the space completely. Understanding this dynamic can completely change the way relationships unfold in everyday life. Another important idea will also appear during this conversation. Toxic behavior does not always come from strangers or distant acquaintances. It can exist inside workplaces, friendships, families, and social circles. Sometimes the people creating the most tension are those who stand closest in daily life. That reality makes the situation more complicated because emotional history and personal loyalty often make it difficult to respond firmly. Many people stay silent to avoid conflict or preserve peace. But silence can slowly strengthen the behavior they hope will disappear. Learning the correct response can protect confidence, emotional stability, and personal dignity without turning every disagreement into a dramatic battle. By the end of this video, a clear understanding will emerge about why toxic people behave the way they do and how one decisive shift can interrupt the cycle permanently. The explanation will reveal why calm boundaries carry more power than emotional reactions, why silence in the wrong moment can invite further disrespect, and why toxic personalities tend to retreat when they encounter someone who understands this psychological rule. These insights rarely appear in everyday conversations, yet they shape countless interactions in homes, workplaces, and social groups around the world. Watching until the end will reveal the complete picture behind this transformation. Each section builds on the previous idea, slowly uncovering the deeper reason toxic people behave the way they do, and the exact moment their influence begins to collapse. The final insight connects everything together and shows how one simple shift in behavior can change the way others respond to you from that point forward. Small changes in human behavior often create the largest ripple effects in life, and this particular shift has the power to redefine the boundaries of respect in a way many people never experience. Welcome to our channel, where psychology, personal growth, and powerful life lessons come together to help you understand human behavior at a deeper level. Every video is designed to reveal ideas that strengthen confidence, sharpen awareness, and help you navigate difficult people and challenging situations with clarity. If this kind of content speaks to you and you want to continue learning how small mindset shifts can transform the way the world treats you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join a growing community focused on wisdom, awareness, and personal strength. Constant pressure from toxic people slowly drains energy in ways that many individuals struggle to explain. Conversations that should feel normal turn into quiet battles for respect. Interruptions begin to appear more often. Words are dismissed before they even finish. Small jokes start to carry a sharp edge that leaves a strange feeling long after the moment passes. Day after day, this pattern repeats until the mind begins to feel tired before the interaction even begins. The weight of these situations does not come from one big event, but from many small moments that accumulate over time. A conversation that should take 5 minutes becomes an exhausting experience because every sentence must fight for space. A simple disagreement becomes uncomfortable because the other person refuses to acknowledge limits. The emotional cost grows quietly, and many people respond by trying to stay calm and polite. Patience feels like the responsible choice. Kindness feels like the mature response. Silence seems like the safest option to avoid conflict. Yet the strange reality is that the more patience appears, the more certain toxic individuals become that their behavior will continue without consequences. What begins as a strategy to keep peace slowly becomes a signal that the behavior will be tolerated. Inside many relationships, this silent pattern continues for months or even years. The individual dealing with disrespect often hopes the situation will improve naturally. Time is expected to solve the problem. A belief forms that the other person will eventually notice the harm they cause and change their behavior. Unfortunately, toxic personalities rarely operate with that level of self-reflection. Instead, they observe reactions carefully and interpret silence as permission. When someone speaks over another person and nothing happens, the mind registers that moment as acceptable behavior. When a sarcastic remark receives no response, the brain quietly learns that the limit does not exist. The next time the remark becomes sharper, the interruption becomes louder. The dismissal becomes more open. Step by step, the environment changes until the disrespect that once seemed shocking begins to feel routine. The hidden truth behind these situations is that disrespect almost never appears suddenly. It does not begin with open hostility or direct attacks. It begins with small tests. A careless comment that seems like humor, a moment when someone interrupts a sentence and keeps speaking as if nothing happened, a subtle gesture that signals a lack of regard for another person's time or opinion. These small actions are not random. They function like experiments. Toxic individuals use them to measure reactions and locate the invisible boundaries that exist in every relationship. If a boundary appears immediately, the test stops. If no boundary appears, the test continues. Over time, these small tests transform into a pattern that shapes the entire dynamic between two people. Silence during these moments carries a meaning that most individuals never intend to send. Remaining quiet often feels like a decision to stay calm and avoid unnecessary tension, but toxic personalities interpret the same silence very differently. To them, silence looks like acceptance. The brain naturally searches for feedback to understand social limits. When feedback does not appear, the mind assumes the action caused no problem. This is why toxic behavior tends to expand slowly instead of remaining small. The absence of resistance gives the behavior space to grow. A person who interrupts once and receives no reaction will feel comfortable interrupting again. A person who makes a disrespectful remark and receives no response will likely repeat the same behavior in the future. Psychological research often highlights that individuals with toxic tendencies frequently struggle with empathy and personal boundaries. This does not mean every toxic person consciously plans their actions. Many simply develop habits that revolve around control and influence. They learn that pushing limits allows them to dominate conversations and situations. When this habit meets a person who avoids confrontation, the toxic behavior begins to flourish. Each interaction becomes an opportunity to stretch the limits further. The person on the receiving end often feels confused because the disrespect seems to grow without a clear starting point. Yet the pattern always follows the same path. Small tests lead to larger actions, and those actions continue expanding until someone finally draws a clear line. Many kind individuals unintentionally strengthen this pattern because they believe respect naturally grows from patience and understanding. Society often encourages people to stay agreeable and cooperative. The idea of being the calm and friendly person feels admirable and responsible. These qualities are valuable in healthy relationships, but toxic personalities interpret them through a completely different lens. Where a healthy person sees kindness, a toxic individual may see a vulnerability. Where a healthy person sees patience, a toxic individual may see a lack of resistance. The same behavior that builds trust with respectful people can create opportunity for someone who thrives on control. Another common reaction in these situations involves over-explaining feelings in an attempt to repair the relationship. A person may spend long periods describing why certain comments feel hurtful or why certain behaviors create discomfort. The hope behind these explanations is that the other person will understand and adjust their actions. Unfortunately, toxic personalities rarely respond well to this approach. Long explanations provide more information, but they do not always create stronger boundaries. In fact, they can sometimes signal uncertainty. When a person explains repeatedly, apologizes for expressing discomfort, or tries to soften every statement to avoid tension, the message that reaches the toxic individual becomes weaker instead of stronger. The behavior continues because the limit still appears flexible. Avoiding conflict creates another challenge that allows toxic dynamics to continue. Conflict carries a negative reputation in many environments. People associate it with anger, arguments, and broken relationships. Because of this fear, many individuals prefer silence even when they feel deeply uncomfortable. They hope that patience will prevent escalation and keep the environment peaceful. Yet silence often protects the toxic behavior instead of preventing it. Without a clear signal that a boundary exists, the behavior continues expanding until it dominates the interaction completely. At some point, frustration begins to grow inside the person experiencing the disrespect. The mind starts questioning why the situation never improves despite continuous efforts to stay polite. Emotional fatigue appears because every conversation feels like a test of patience. Confidence can begin to shrink as the repeated dismissal creates doubt about personal value. Many individuals start wondering if they are somehow responsible for the behavior or if they simply lack the strength to stop it. This internal struggle makes the situation even more exhausting because the battle shifts from the external interaction to the inner thoughts. Yet a powerful shift exists that can interrupt this entire cycle in a surprisingly simple way. The change does not require aggression or dramatic confrontation. In fact, strong emotional reactions often strengthen toxic dynamics because they give the other person exactly the energy and attention they expect. The real shift comes from clarity. A clear boundary delivered calmly carries far more power than long emotional explanations. The moment a boundary appears, the dynamic changes. Instead of guessing where the limit might be, the toxic individual suddenly faces a visible line. Calm boundaries send a message that requires no debate. The words themselves remain simple and direct. A statement such as not appreciating a certain tone or comment communicates the limit without inviting unnecessary discussion. The strength of the boundary comes from the certainty behind it. There is no long defense, no emotional escalation, and no attempt to convince the other person to agree. The message stands on its own. The person delivering the boundary does not chase approval or validation. They simply define the behavior that is not acceptable. This calm approach surprises many toxic personalities because it removes the usual patterns they rely on. They expect emotional reactions, arguments, or endless explanations. When none of those appear, the dynamic becomes unfamiliar. The conversation suddenly shifts from a space where they control the direction to a space where limits exist. The calm tone signals confidence rather than fear. The short statement leaves no room for manipulation or misinterpretation. The boundary stands clearly without apology. Power dynamics play a significant role in how toxic individuals interact with others. Many of their behaviors revolve around identifying who can be influenced and who cannot. People who avoid confrontation, over-explain themselves, or constantly seek approval often appear easier to dominate. These signals unintentionally invite further testing. Once a calm boundary appears, those signals disappear. The toxic individual realizes that the interaction will not follow the old pattern anymore. The person they once tested quietly now responds with clarity and self-respect. This moment often creates a pause in the behavior. The toxic individual must decide how to respond to the new dynamic. Some quickly adjust their actions because they recognize that the boundary will remain firm. Others may test the limit one more time to confirm whether the change is real. This is where the second step becomes important. Boundaries carry power only when they remain consistent. If the same disrespect appears again and the response disappears, the toxic individual learns that the boundary was temporary. Consistency transforms a simple statement into a lasting limit. When the boundary is crossed again, the response becomes action rather than debate. Attention withdraws from the interaction. The conversation ends. Distance appears. These responses communicate the message more clearly than long discussions ever could. Toxic individuals often thrive on attention and emotional engagement. When those elements disappear, their influence weakens quickly. Silence used in this way carries a completely different meaning than the silence that allowed the behavior to grow earlier. This silence is intentional. It signals that the interaction no longer deserves energy. Walking away from a conversation or ending an interaction removes the reward that toxic behavior often seeks. Without attention or emotional reactions to feed the dynamic, the toxic individual faces a situation where the behavior produces no benefit. Over time, the results of these boundaries begin to appear. Some individuals change their behavior because they realize the limits are permanent. They adapt their tone, their language, and their actions to remain within the boundary. Others choose a different path. When manipulation and testing no longer work, they slowly reduce their presence in the relationship. Conversations become less frequent. Invitations disappear. Distance grows naturally because the dynamic that once gave them control no longer exists. For the person who establishes the boundary, these outcomes often bring an unexpected sense of calm. The exhausting cycle of constant disrespect finally loses its momentum. Conversations become simpler because the limits remain clear. Confidence grows because personal dignity no longer depends on the reactions of someone who refuses to respect boundaries. The energy that once disappeared into endless patience becomes available again for healthier interactions. Respectful individuals rarely fear clear boundaries. In fact, many appreciate them because they create a stable and honest environment where expectations remain visible. Only those who benefit from weak limits tend to resist them. This is why boundaries often act as a filter that reveals the true nature of the people within a relationship. Those who value mutual respect remain present and adjust their behavior naturally. Those who rely on control or manipulation find the environment uncomfortable and eventually move away. As this process unfolds, a deeper understanding of personal power begins to form. Respect does not grow from endless patience alone. It grows from clarity about how one expects to be treated and the willingness to protect that standard consistently. Toxic individuals depend on uncertainty and hesitation to maintain influence. When certainty appears, their strategies lose effectiveness. The interaction transforms from a space where disrespect slowly expands into a space where dignity quietly holds its ground. Respect often follows a quiet rule that many people spend years trying to understand. It does not always come from being the most agreeable person in the room, and it rarely grows from constantly proving kindness to people who refuse to value it. True respect begins the moment a person decides that their dignity is not negotiable, the moment someone stops tolerating behavior that diminishes their voice, their time, or their self-worth. A powerful shift begins to happen. The same people who once felt comfortable interrupting, mocking, or dismissing suddenly realize that the situation has changed. The silent permission that once allowed their behavior to grow is gone. In its place stands clarity, a clear signal that certain lines cannot be crossed anymore. This is the point where toxic individuals begin to lose the advantage they once had. Their influence fades because the environment they relied on no longer exists. Confidence replaces hesitation. Calm boundaries replace silent tolerance, and the person who once felt drained by constant disrespect begins to regain control of their space and their peace. This transformation rarely requires loud arguments or dramatic confrontations. It grows from quiet certainty and consistent actions. When people learn how to define their limits calmly and protect them without apology, the entire dynamic of their relationships begins to shift. Some individuals respond with respect because they recognize the strength behind those boundaries. Others slowly disappear because they understand that manipulation and disrespect will no longer work. Both outcomes bring the same result. Life becomes lighter, conversations become healthier, and energy no longer disappears into battles that never deserved attention in the first place. Now a question remains that can reveal powerful experiences and lessons from real life. Many people have faced someone who constantly crossed lines, ignored limits, and treated respect as if it were optional. When that moment finally arrived and a boundary was set clearly, what happened next? Did the person change their behavior, or did they slowly step away when the old patterns stopped working? Share that experience in the comments below, because your story might help someone else realize that they are not alone in dealing with toxic behavior. If this video helped you understand the psychology behind respect and boundaries, take a moment to support the channel. Tap the subscribe button so you never miss the next video about psychology, stoicism, and personal power. Also, leave a like on this video and share it with someone who might need this message today. Every like and every share helps these ideas reach more people who are searching for clarity and strength in their lives. Because sometimes a single shift in mindset can quietly transform the way the entire world responds to you.